Hi, I'm Erica Flint, and welcome to Living Hypnotically, where we explore the benefits and application of hypnosis with professional hypnotists and other professionals in the field. And today we have Professor Sam, everybody. Professor Sam from the Academy of Eternity. Oh, man, I'm so excited to talk about the millions of things that we probably want to talk about. I brought Sam into this project to provide information from a neuroscience perspective. Sam Tullman, welcome to the program. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. And I have to say, it's funny to be referred to as Professor Sam because I don't know that anybody else refers to me as that.
Yeah, it's in the book.
It was a fun role to
Absolutely
play.
is. And
Yeah.
we have Professor Sam's Hall of Brain right here, which is one of my favorite passages on page 43. And then we also have the Neuro Lab, which is also part of Professor Sam's part of the book. So we invite you to grab a copy of this book. It's Neuroscience, Understanding of Neuroscience and Hypnosis to Help Us Lead Better Lives, told in a fun story format. Young Erica is in it. Professor Sam is in it. There's other characters that you might recognize in it too. So Sam, tell us a little more about how did you become a neuroscientist? I'm not sure if that's actually the title that you use, but give us a brief intro.
Yeah. I've gone by many different titles, and I think to some degree that's appropriate. I don't have a doctorate in neuroscience, but I have done a lot of neuroscience research and a lot of applied neuroscience working with people. So I think, yeah, that is quite appropriate. Great. Well, how did I come there? Oh man, so it's a big story, and we can chop it up into different bits. But basically, from a relatively early period in my life, I think what I thought I was interested in, and this partly has to do with the different difficulties that I was encountering, specifically in my family of origin. So what I thought I was interested in early on was, why are people so crazy? Basically, like, why do we do so much harm to each other? All of us, not any special kind of crazy, but the ordinary kind of crazy that we all have. And so what I thought I was interested in is, why is this the case?
Okay.
And I want to know how these things up here tick, because they're wild and they're unruly.
And how old were you? Like, how old are we talking here that you're having these thoughts?
Oh, I mean, this was like from middle school that I was interested in this.
Okay.
It was like a psychology perspective, because that's what was more approachable and available. And then
at that time, yeah.
And then as I got into science in high school, I really loved the natural sciences. And so I was like, oh, there's the kind of this melding of psychology and the sciences or the hard sciences, let's say, is neuroscience. And so that kind of became a natural route that I was interested in. And that's exactly what I did in my undergrad. And so I ended up doing a lot of research. And my life, it had a dip early on when I was first interested in, why do these things work so not well sometimes? And then things got better for a little while. And when I was in college, when I was in my undergrad, I went through another very difficult period where I found myself extremely depressed. And so I was really struggling again, and very fortunately had a close mentor of mine who recommended that I start a meditation practice and kind of work on some different unworking some of my beliefs about myself and my life, which was this initial kind of excursion and exploration of what was going on in here.
Yeah, and I love how you say that. Right?
Yeah.
The unlearning. That's a perspective that a lot of people have, is we learn a lot of behaviors that for us to feel better, a lot of it is an unlearning. It's not necessarily something new.
Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh. And I love what you said there, because that totally ties into this Zen practice that then became very important to me, is still. anyways, yeah, so that was really, without realizing it, I think that was like some early, really what we were doing was some hypnotic work and other work too, working on habits, working on behaviors. But that was a profound period of growth for me. And so I went from thinking that I wanted to know about why all of these minds were so unruly and did so much harm to realizing, oh, what's happening to me? My life is changing so much. I'm walking the same streets, going to the same places, and it looks so different. And I feel so different.
Wow.
What's happening? Why are things changing? And so all of a sudden I realized I wasn't so interested in why our minds are so unruly or why we do so much harm. I was interested in how do we do better? How do we help each other do better? How do we ourselves do better? And so that kind of,
so it's not as much as like the diagnosing as to why is it this way, but let's just feel better. So here's the pathway back to healing or completeness or the end of suffering or just feeling better, whatever.
spot on. And so I was living that from a personal perspective. What's the pathway to get back to this wholeness, this heartfulness? And then also I was fascinated from it from a scientific perspective about this. And so I started going in that direction in my research. And then after that, where you and I met was at 40 Years of Zen originally.
Right.
So
Yep.
began there as research assistant. And after a little while, found myself actually running the neuroscience side of that program and just saw some marvelous, spectacular things, both things that people came in and were able to do already with their minds and with their brains. And just, wow, that just blew the lid off my understanding of neuroscience. And I think probably anybody, even people that are quite familiar with the brain, would be like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that was something that people could do.
Can you share something with us? Like one of the
Oh
mind-blowing things that happened?
Sure. There's so many things. And let me give some context first. On the other end, there's also people that were coming in and maybe they started from a place where they were struggling and they didn't have a lot of range or capacity in what they could do. And seeing over just a few days what was possible was equally as inspiring. Wow, just a few days of really intense training opens up so many possibilities. And so during that time while I was there, it was such a range of people that we saw. People that came in with kind of various severe difficulties or kind of mental or brain dysfunctions. And then also I got a chance to do research on different meditation masters. One was a Zen master who became my Zen teacher.
Ooh,
and
I want to hear about that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Seeing him go into different states and immediately, without even doing analysis on the data, right? Like, of course, you get the juicy stuff when you do the analysis, but just looking at it raw while we were recording, and him saying, okay, now I'm going to do this state where it's the heart mind that embraces the whole universe, and seeing a profound change on the screen of what was happening with the brain. It was like, oh my gosh. Or seeing what is the kind of heart mind that aches for the world, and seeing what that looked like, and having it in some ways completely aligned with what I would imagine that would look based on my knowledge. And in other ways, just, oh my God, I had no idea that it would be like that. And so just a range of things, having other people come in and essentially being able to, for short periods, turn the overwhelming majority, 99% of their brain activity from a power perspective, just turn it off for a few minutes at a time and then blink back on. So I remember somebody that did that a few times and being like, wow, what is going on there? Another person that was able to generate so much power in the front of their brain in a kind of frequency range that wasn't as common or easy to manipulate. More power than our system could actually even register. Basically, at a certain point, we were like, oh, we have to change the parameters of the system because the system doesn't think it's real anymore.
Wow.
So, spectacular things.
Wow. So that's fascinating. And my time at 40 Years of Zen, I was there for 5 days and we did all sorts of things. We did some heart math breathing. We were counting the number of breaths we were taking every minute. We were doing some group work. We were in the pods, right? We did the spider cap. You might have a better name for that than what I'm saying. But Sam, there was a lot of different things that we were doing there. I call it like accelerated brain training. Is that kind of how you'd think of it too?
I think that's quite appropriate. I think that's quite appropriate. And we can talk about the brain if we're talking about the physical organ. We can talk about the mind if we're talking about our experience of it. It's all really one thing. And even the body. The body is actually part of the mind. The brain is a separate organ, but the mind encompasses the brain and the body and really everything, our entire experience. When we look out, we're actually seeing nothing other than our own mind.
Wow.
Quite marvelous.
Oh my gosh.
From that perspective.
That's a mind well right there. We're not seeing anything other but our own mind. That's amazing. Part of the reason I wrote this book, and the part of the reason it was a couple of years after I worked with you at 40 Years of Zen that I reached out to you and said, hey, I want to write a book that is helping people understand the power of hypnosis, the power of calming the nervous system, the power of what I call the alpha sequence in here. And the alpha sequence is a hypnotic technique, and it is designed to take people to the still point. And the still point is a calm and focused mind, an open and receptive heart, and a tranquil body. And by helping people just achieve that, so it's not, we might do hypnosis for a specific intention. I want to lose weight. I want to stop smoking. But this style of hypnosis, I really love because the intention merely is to take you nowhere and do nothing. It's basically a reset, and it's basically designed to take you back. At the very end of the sequence, I have folks drop into their heart, if you remember, right? Drop your consciousness into your heart. Some suggestions for bridging this heart-mind connection. And so that's what I think would be really interesting for you to talk about, because I know a lot of hypnotists love to watch this program. And we do talk about the heart-mind connection, and we talk about the nervous system, and we talk about the amygdala. And you've got some great information that you put in the book just along those lines. But what do you know right now, and what would you like to share right now, Sam, about hypnosis and how people are feeling better and meditation? What do you think are the important things that people understand from your perspective?
One thing, just as you were describing the alpha sequence, I was like, oh, just so wonderful. I could feel it as you were describing it, right? Because
Yeah,
that's what we practice. And sometimes we call it meditation, and there's certain meditation practices that can be very much like that. There's other meditation practices too. And sometimes we call it hypnosis if it's delivered by somebody else, or even self-hypnosis if it's delivered by ourselves. And so it goes by many names. In one sense, I think it's so appropriate to call it the alpha sequence. You and I were talking right before we officially started the conversation about what is the definition of hypnosis. Well, there's many different definitions, but this one where you're let's say amplifying, you're turning the sound up on one part of your experience and kind of to the exclusion of other parts of your experience. And actually the alpha frequency in the brain, that's almost exactly what it's doing. So the alpha frequency is basically a primary way that the brain figures out how to just hone in on one specific part of an experience and to the exclusion of others. And if that experience is dropping into our heart, dropping into our body, is becoming more still, all of a sudden we become so malleable. So we can be hypnotized by anything by that definition, which I loved your definition. We could be hypnotized by fear. We could be hypnotized by other people and manipulated like a snake. You hypnotize a snake, essentially, if you're a snake charmer. And so just that way, we could be hypnotized by anything. But if we learn to be hypnotized by the kind of calm rhythms of our own body in this more still place, well, from there, the sky is the limit. And if we learn to be hypnotized from our own mind-body connection, which one thing I think we talk about in the book is this vagus nerve, which kind of serves as this connection between the brain and the body. And since we talked about the mind as the brain and the body, that means the vagus nerve has got to be pretty important, right? That's a central
Right.
place that the mind lives, up and down that vagus nerve.
Yeah.
So if we learn to be hypnotized by that rhythm and just sync up with it and become absorbed with it, our capacity to change, to unlearn, to relearn is just immense. It's just immense.
Yeah. Thank you. And I love the way that you use these words, being hypnotized by our own rhythms of our natural body. And it's so obvious that you're a Zen practitioner to me, because it's not just the science, but it's the beautiful artistic and spiritual component that you combine in your work, which is what I love so much. So can you talk a little bit about Zen and how you incorporate that into your life?
Sure. Oh my gosh. Yes. And this kind of kicks back to earlier in our conversation. At some point, midway through my time at 40 years of Zen, I started dabbling and 40 years of Zen is the name. And I remember the first time I went out to, I had started practicing meditation practice at the Zen temple in Seattle. Choboji is the name of that temple.
Mm-hmm.
A wonderful community, a wonderful teacher, Genjo Roshi. And I remember the first time I went out to coffee with that kind of group, and everyone was like, "Oh, what do you do?" Just pleasant questions. And I was like, "Oh, I work for this place and blah, blah, blah." I wasn't trying to talk that much about it. They're like, "Oh, what's it called?" And I was like, "Oh, 40 years of Zen." Like under my breath. And they're like, "Come again?" And I was like, "It's called 40 years of Zen." And they're like, "Oh, why is it called that?" And I was like, the assumption is that after a week, you could get what 40 years of Zen training is worth. And I was like, but I don't really believe that. I want to say it's both, right? So obviously we know from 1 week in that program, you can get these amazing impacts.
Absolutely.
And also there's a lot more to Zen training and to hypnosis than just, we get our quick fix once for 1 week.
Yeah, but it really does prove, and this is what's so nice about hypnosis, people can have what I call a mind blow. I think we've all had a mind blow before. We might call it an aha moment, something like that, where we might say there are gamma brain waves being delivered in the brain, right? Aha, like cool stuff is happening, right? We absolutely want to facilitate stuff like that to happen in the brain. So we want cool things to happen and create an environment where we can get these aha moments and where we can. So I think it's absolutely possible in an instant for everything to change. We would call it miraculous. Yes. Okay. And that's just kind of one way of the work that we do as hypnotists, and what you probably see at 40 years of Zen in your work is like an indicator of how powerful we are, right? Like that one brain off the charts, you had to recalibrate, right? Off the charts. All right. That's going to happen all the time, I bet, as we learn more and more about ourselves. But the truth is to be consistent, because the world keeps churning and the stress keeps happening, and there's COVID and there's stress and elections and all sorts of things that, even with our best intention, if we are not continuing our practice, and this is why part of my work now, I've been doing this for 10 years now, Sam, but a big part of what I believe now is my clients are really served. There's a lot of spiritual work that takes place. People are off their spiritual path, and I'm not talking about religion, just they're off a path that makes them happy.
Yeah.
And people need to be consistent. They need to have a practice, because we're in the stream, right? And we're going to go through life. And so if we're not doing something intentionally to remember who we are, that we are eternal beings, to rise above the BS, because people are suffering.
Yes.
They really are.
Yes.
And so it's both. We can have amazing experiences, and then we want to have our routine, our practice that we can lean into during times of stress.
It's so both. And really, that's the thing. It's like these big sudden experiences, like you can have at 40 years of Zen or a week-long meditation retreat or in the midst of a deep hypnosis session. Those things, then we need to figure out how we enact them in our everyday life and create ongoing change. And so, yeah, this is totally a part of Zen practice as well. And in Zen, we call it a kensho. It's this big moment where something sudden changes and you see things freshly. And it's such an opportunity. And it's great. You had this big Kensho, you had this big breakthrough moment. Keep going now. It's like,
keep going.
Wonderful. It was bound to happen eventually. Great. Keep going. We've all had that, and it's wonderful, and you should definitely have it. It's not to be missed. And don't spend too long gloating about it and thinking you got somewhere, because you did, and you got to keep walking.
And you got to keep going. And you got to keep going.
So wonderful. We'll get back to the story in a second. The other thing that you said, I just really appreciated this: people being distant from what makes them happy. And we can call that a spiritual life. We can call it really anything. We can call it just coming home to yourself. And yourself could be, sure, we could think about our small selves, our mind, or we could think about me in this larger sense. We could think about it metaphysically, or we could think about it in terms of connection to what we're made of, the very earth itself, or the universe itself. One of my teachers I love, he used to always refer to us as bags of stardust, which we are. Bags of stardust. How wonderful.
Don't forget it. Yeah.
So one of the kind of foundational Zen teachers is often referred to as the sixth Zen ancestor. He has this beautiful quote in kind of this text that he wrote, and Zen is really not very much about text. The texts are great, but go find it yourself. Go have the experience yourself. Don't spend time reading.
Experience is key. Okay.
But this is one of the only texts in Zen that people are like, oh, that text. It's considered one of three texts that are really deeply. And so the text in this kind of talk that this sixth Zen ancestor is giving, maybe 14 or 1500 years ago, a long time ago, maybe a little more recent, probably 1400 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
He's giving a talk to a big group of people, purportedly thousands of people, because Zen was actually really big at that time when he was around in the south of China. And so he's giving this talk and he's bringing things back down to earth for everyone. And he's saying, what is this enlightenment? Everyone's so focused on kind of enlightenment and an awakening, and maybe they think they're going to start floating around or have magical powers and shoot fire from their eyes and they become enlightened, something like this. And he's like, no. Enlightenment is when you meet the good friend in your own mind. That's what enlightenment is. Enlightenment is when you meet the good friend in your own mind. And really, then you meet this friend, and that's the breakthrough experience. And then you learn to live with this friend. Any friendship, you can't just say, great, it was wonderful to meet you. I feel such a connection with you. See you in a few years. It's like, you could do that. That's great too. It happens that way. But even more wonderful if you're like, hey, let's go on a walk tomorrow. Let's spend some time together. And so part of Zen practice is on a regular basis having a relationship with this good friend, which is just part of you, part of your own mind.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. It gave me chills when you said that. I absolutely love it, because a lot of it really is that we talk about in hypnosis that we don't talk about overtly is self-love and greater self-love. But we don't talk about it overtly as much because it's not something that they don't really buy self-love. They aren't really, nobody's ever come to me and said, Eric, I need to love myself more. They might know that. They might say, I need to improve my self-esteem. They might say, I have negative self-talk. But people are coming to us with a problem, right? I need to stop drinking, or I need to stop smoking, things like that. And along the way, we hope that they meet their best friend, their good friend, and recognize the self and how amazing they are. One of my taglines that I use with my students is, my job is done when you realize how amazing you are. Right? It's like, okay, oh, you got it. I'm out of here. I'll go be by the beach.
Great.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Then you hand the keys back over to them.
Okay, good. Next, I'm going to go relax. Yeah. So thank you so much. I wanted to bring up something, because that's just really profound. I think we can just leave that right there. I do want to bring up something that happened to me. I was driving to Seattle and I had to catch my flight. It was canceled in Bellingham. So I'm driving in a snowstorm And I'm nervous, and I'm a hypnotist, and I'm trying not to be nervous. And so I started to hum. And there's a lot of things that we can do physiologically with the body. And a lot of those are included in the alpha sequence, right? Like peripheral vision, dropping your jaw, slowing down your breathing, those things. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of these, like maybe hacks that you might use, because I know that for me, humming, and our co-author, right, of the book, Sarah Solstice, is a professional artist and singer, right? And the work that she does, I've always considered her work very hypnotic, right? Because we've got music, beautiful music with beautiful pattern and language, and it is so engaging, and it just carries us away, right?
Yeah. From the neuroscience perspective, there's two ends of it, right?
Get the book, Start Hypnotizing. Get the book and first hypnosis lesson free now at canyoubeahypnotist.com.
So one end is one of the first places that kind of is innervated, or that innervates our vagus nerve, which is to say it stimulates our vagus nerve.
Okay.
Is in our inner ear. So our vagus nerve, vagus actually means wandering. That's
Okay.
the Latin root wandering. So it wanders over to the inner part of our ear. And for that reason, our ear is extremely sensitive to specific things. It doesn't care so much about words and syllables and this kind of thing. Yeah. It's focused on tone and timbre. And so when we hear these sounds that might be threatening, for example, if I hear like a loud screech outside, I'm immediately, without thinking about it, I'm going to hold breath, and I'm going to be all tight and up in my head and shoulders. On the other end, it's my partner and I, we have a dog, and we're always talking to him in a baby voice. And it's like, why do we talk to him in a baby voice? It's silly. It doesn't mean anything to him, but probably it does mean something to him because he has that same vagus nerve. All mammals actually have a form of this vagus nerve. And so this is a way for us to communicate to each other caringly, because we hear this baby talk. Nice,
but it's sweet and it's safe.
And he knows, and he's wagging his tail, and we're both happy doing it because it feels good, because we know this is a way to communicate love and safety to each other. Same thing when we hear different sounds, when we hear different resonant sounds that put our nervous system at ease. So that's one end of things. Then the other end of things is our vagus nerve then goes down through this kind of part of our kind of throat and neck. Yeah. And so humming is another really interesting way to vibrate and shake this part of the vagus nerve.
Oh, that's what's happening. Okay.
And humming, there's all sorts of different things. One thing is we're vibrating and shaking this ventral vagus nerve, which helps us feel more safe and at home.
Okay.
So there's
almost felt like a direct access to me. I almost felt like I was like really, because I didn't realize you would actually be vibrating the vagus while you're humming, but you're almost like putting your hand on the switch type of a thing.
Totally. And speaking of putting your hand on a switch, another interesting way to immediately hack this is like, one of the reasons that stress and like shoulder tightness are so associated is because of this vagus nerve. So if we can loosen this part of our body, actually our vagus nerve has more space to activate and deactivate on its own. So it's more responsive. And actually this little part, it's the sternocleidomastoides, this muscle that goes from the back of our ear down to the front. You can actually grab that and pinch it and work it around a little bit as a mechanism to help you relax, because that's tied directly to your vagus nerve as well. I do feel something under there. Oh yeah. And you can go pretty intense on that. It's to the point of, this is slightly uncomfortable, but actually it's a direct stimulation. It's a direct way to stimulate this part of the nervous system. And this was confusing for me. We want to stimulate the vagus nerve. We want the vagus nerve to be engaged. That's the yes.
That's
Yes,
when we are feeling calm and connected, is when the vagus nerve is engaged.
that's right. That's right. So when the vagus nerve is engaged, it slows our heart rate down.
Mhm.
It helps us feel more safe and at home, and our breath also slows. The
Yeah.
other way, actually, in this humming, and then when our vagus nerve gets sleepy, if we're tight and it can't react as well to our situations, and it doesn't act on its own quite as well. And so our heart rate
Oh,
increases.
oh, I see.
Um,
Okay.
Other way that humming and singing is so wonderful for our nervous system, though, is just on account of our amazing minds trying to accommodate this sequence of outputting a lot of breath and
Mhm.
make certain sounds over
Oh,
time. We actually lengthen our breath rate with most kinds of singing. And so we start breathing slower and taking deeper
as
breaths,
we're
more
doing.
measured breaths. It's actually a kind of breath work. And there's a fairly well known in different spiritual communities that there's cases where people doing breath training, like for singers, have these
Yeah.
breakthrough spiritual experiences because they're manipulating their breath and their nervous system. They're not trying to, they're just trying to be good at their craft. But all of a sudden, they're in these deep states without realizing that they were getting themselves into that. And
Wow.
that's just an
That's
interesting lever.
amazing.
Yeah.
So you hear that, everyone, by singing and breathing. So to remind us here, I used it when driving to Seattle. It didn't feel safe. And so I felt it gave me something, and I was just humming, I don't even remember what song, out loud. It gave my mind something to focus on so that I could be focused on driving rather than freaking out around
Yeah.
me. And so giving us that focal point, giving me something to do, right, was really helpful.
Right. And you just highlighted the third piece, which I wasn't even thinking about, which is it's an anchor. And sometimes there's two ways to go when we're stressed. There's three ways, but one of them isn't so great. One way we can just
Right.
continue on cycling. Another way is we can find an anchor. It could be
Yep.
a song or something and say, okay, I'm putting my full attention here. And when it goes off, I'm going to bring it back. And that's very
Put it
settling.
back.
And
Yep.
then there's a third way, which is if it's appropriate in the moment, and it's not always appropriate, but sometimes it can be really useful to say, wow, I'm feeling so uncomfortable and afraid right now. What's that like?
Mhm.
What's that
Yep.
like? I'm not going to be hypnotized by my fear and discomfort, but I'm going to be hypnotized by something else. And while I'm in that,
Curiosity. Let's do curiosity, because that would always be the best way to, like, as a default, right? If you forget everything else, just be curious.
right?
Be curious. Why am I angry? Why am I getting irritated with that guy? Like you, I have these conversations in my head, right? Why am I getting upset at this situation? And I try to escape myself from the situation for a moment and realize what's going on in here, and just being curious about it saves, I would say, 95% of any problems I used to have when I didn't do this.
Yeah. And also, taking this at multiple levels. It's like there's the cognitive level, like, why is this happening? And then there's also
Mhm.
like, what is this like? And then also not even
Right.
accepting any of the answers that you come up with, either with your mind or your body. Just, oh, interesting. That's an answer that came up.
You just sit with
Think
it.
again.
Yep.
And then let's ask this again. Why? What? How?
Now, I remember learning that. So I want to run this by you. I don't know that you'll have the answer or not, Sam, but I remember learning in hypnosis that it was fascinating to learn that neuroscientists believe the nervous system could only generate a feeling for a certain period of time, meaning it costs the body resources for us to feel a feeling, and there's chemicals that get fired off to generate that feeling. And so for a lot of our clients, they feel like they're sad all the time or angry all the time, but in reality, they might only have a craving or a feeling for 15 seconds. If we could get them to focus on something else, it'll pass. Is that true?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think there's lots of different ways that we can talk about it. So from a psychological perspective, mood or emotions can last longer because emotions are not just feelings, they have this thought component.
Right.
Moods can last a briefer amount of time than emotions, but they can still be longer. You could be in a bad mood for quite a while, as we all know.
Mhm.
And yet, also, if you get a little more granular, like I've been in a bad mood for hours, and it's like, if you were really experiencing each second of those hours, you weren't feeling bad every second of those few hours.
Right.
Probably you kept like you were hypnotized, like you were meditating on feeling bad.
You
You
keep
kept coming back to
I'm still
this
feeling bad. Yep.
pattern and thought component, and your brain is set to recognize things. So it sets these ideas of how it thinks things are, and then it says, when next time it happens, I'm going to be ready, and it recognizes it. And so when you keep recognizing, I feel bad over and over, then that's called a mood.
Yeah.
So you're in a mood now because you're set to recognize, I feel bad. And then that's your meditation for a little while. It slips away, comes back, I feel bad. Now it's a mood because you're recognizing over and over, okay.
And you're
Feeling,
almost looking for it though, too. You're almost setting yourself up for this. And this is where some very basic hypnosis really alleviates some of this, which is pattern interrupts, understanding a story that we might be telling ourselves over and over again, being somehow associated to a story in our life, right?
yes,
And getting rid of the ego and all of these kind of stories is a big part of our healing, in my experience, because all of our answers are just right here,
yeah,
right now,
yeah.
everything.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, so when we realize if we can interrupt this pattern, like you're saying, if we can learn that critical skill, we realize the feelings themselves are brief. And you can even do this with feelings that feel urgent. And so this is certainly going back to Zen practice. It's an important part of Zen practice as well, more than probably almost any other meditation tradition. There's maybe one or two that I can think of, but Zen is really committed to, we're going to sit through lots of discomfort, and discomfort is going to be a great teacher for you. And so when you sit with something as urgent as pain, my knee feels terrible. Oh my God, this is a crisis. Not really a crisis. You're not actually hurting yourself in most cases, but you really look at that and you realize the feeling is not actually there all the time. And the more and more granular you get, it's like, oh, what's this feeling? Oh, it feels warm. There's an achiness. They're not even in the same place. There's warmth in my upper leg and there's achiness on my outer leg. And for some reason, I think my knee hurts. What's that about? But we look for this pattern. We're trained to recognize it. It's just the way that the mind works. There's nothing wrong with that. We can also learn a different perspective of not recognizing patterns, of saying, I'm just going to set patterns down for now and just let things appear the way that they appear. And when I think I'm recognizing a pattern, let me look at that a little more closely and see, when I look at it under a microscope, and see, oh yeah, it's not as much of a pattern as I thought it was. I made the pattern. It's just happening.
Good. Yeah. So the conscious mind can get us in trouble by looping everything or lumping everything into a bucket, right? And we see this a lot of times with folks who feel a sense of feeling stuck. And this is where emotional intelligence is so important, because we might have a client who says that they feel terrible. And if you ask them about that, they'll just, I just feel terrible, terrible. And if you don't get to the place where you're unpacking that they're actually angry, or they're actually fearful, or they're actually feeling guilty, or some level of sorrow, if you don't help them identify which of those specific emotions it is, we realize that our clients and us as humans are going to move from one space to the other. We might feel fearful, and then once we get rid of fear, we might be angry. Once we get rid of the anger, we might feel a little guilt or resentment. And so if we don't help our clients or us identify specifically what some of those precise feelings are, we just feel like we're feeling bad for an extended period of time, instead of being able to say, I was really angry.
Yeah.
I was like afraid, and then I was angry, and then I was mad at myself. And then I came around and forgave myself. We go through these stages. And if we don't recognize that, this is where a lot of people feel stuck.
Sure. And we can do so much harm, not only to ourselves, but also to others when we don't realize. So if I realize, like, I'm angry right now, And then I walk back in and I have a conversation with my partner and I started to feel angry. I can put some doubt on that. Yeah, I'm just feeling angry right now. It isn't actually about this interaction. Or maybe it is about this interaction, but you know what? I can actually do this in a gentler way. When we don't realize it's there, we react.
And I've gotten better at that. Like I said, I've been doing this for 10 years. I wasn't paying attention a lot of kind of the way that my mind was functioning, the things that I was saying. It's been since I was a hypnotist that I'm really paying attention to what I say and how that feels, and what I'm thinking creates the feelings. And I feel like I've cleaned a lot of things up for myself, but it's not something I was taught in school or in college or anything, right? I had to figure it out as part of life.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
And part of that figuring out, so we've talked about this unlearning perspective and this kind of dropping patterns perspective. Then there's this beautiful constructive piece as well. And we do this in hypnosis, we do this in meditation practice. Zen has this really beautiful, wonderful way of going about constructively recognizing patterns as well. First, we have to learn the skill of unrecognizing our patterns or dropping our kind of recognition a little bit. And then we get to play with stepping into different things. So in the Zen tradition, one thing that a lot of people hear about when they start reading about Zen is they hear about these koans. And koans are like these different little like stories or parables. Sometimes they're questions. And we can enjoy them at a kind of mental, cognitive level. A lot of them have wonderful, apparent kind of morals on the surface of the story. And so that's fun too, to just read it. In the kind of Zen traditions that center around these, like the one that I happen to practice in, really our work with koan is to actually embody it fully. And the koan becomes something that we go about in our day with. So we become hypnotized by this koan, and everything that we see in the world is this koan. And so I'll give you a wonderful example of, there's this one koan which revolves around this idea of this kind of wise old woman who is on the side of the road, and these different monks pass by and they ask for directions to this certain place. It's supposed to be a special place for enlightenment. And so she kind of chidingly says, because obviously, as you've said, right here has everything we need. There's no special place to go for enlightenment. There's no special place to go to realize where we are. So she kind of chidingly says, go straight on. And people are like, oh, okay, I guess the direction is straight ahead to get to this place that I'm trying to get to. Not realizing that she's saying, you're here, all you need to do is keep going, and you'll remain here. And so living with that koan for the day, taking
in
that
your mind, implementing it, seeing it. Yep.
And everywhere that I go, hearing this kind of encouragement, go straight on. Okay, I've gotten some feedback that something didn't work for somebody that I said, okay, go straight on. Great. Okay, now I have this thing coming up. I didn't see it coming. Go straight on. So that's one wonderful example. There's also koans that are set up to help us unrecognize patterns. So that's a lot of core koans help us say, drop the pattern over and over.
Okay.
There's other koans that are, they're endless, right? And they take you through these different hypnotic states, really, where you're living with it for your whole day. Sure, you sit down and live with it too, but you're also meant to walk around with it and say, this is the perspective that I'm seeing the world through right now. This is where I am.
Yeah.
So I can walk around with a kind of being hypnotized where everyone that I see is a teacher. Everything that I see is a teacher to me. Or I can be hypnotized in a way that everything I see is me. I'm not separate from anything I see. Everything I see is me. That's a different kind of hypnotic state that you can arrive at from working with these koans.
And you would get a different experience. It would be a different but useful experience. And one way that I've always thought about hypnosis is just it's trying on different perspectives. We have the ability to use our focusing and filtering to imagine that we are in different perspectives, whether we are first person, third person, fly on the wall, all things, right? That's just real positioning, but trying on these different perspectives. Some people would call it a reframe, right? And the whole idea, like with the reframe and the different perspectives, it's a part of learning, right? We're basically sitting there saying to ourselves, if I find myself in this situation all over again, I'm going to do it in this other way now that I've been through it once. And so when we sit there and we think about these different perspectives and the reframe, we're really doing the work right at that moment so that the next time we come across something like this or similar, we have a better response.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Spot on. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
cool.
couldn't agree more. And the more access to these different places that we have, the more flexible we can be in our everyday life. It's like, oh, I'm going to put on
And
this
that flexibility,
Yeah.
which makes us feel free. At least for me, the flexibility. It seems like we could talk all day.
Yeah, we totally could.
It's just really exciting. Good thing we wrote a book together. Because we did talk. You've got a couple chapters in here just of the cool stuff that you're saying. And we talk about the alpha sequence, and we talk about how to apply it to your life. And we talk about the way that the brain works and some of the misperceptions and the amygdala and the vagus nerve. And we've got some cool practices in there, all with a really cool story. So again, thank you so much. I just have a lot of gratitude for you and the work that you're doing in the world and how you show up. I obviously loved working with you at 40 Years of Zen when I went through it for that week. We stayed connected. I kept doing work. I reached out to you. You were excited in partnering on this. And now we get to take this book, and there's, I don't know how many people are practicing the alpha sequence right now, but there's a lot of people practicing and getting relief with the alpha sequence. We have a lot of hypnotists who are using the alpha sequence with their clients because it uses physiological techniques to help them enter into the hypnotic state. So it's easier. It's using the physical body. So thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we end our program today?
No, I just want to thank you for your wonderful work in the world. It's been delightful chatting, and everybody that's watching, thank you for doing the work, whether you yourself are a hypnotist, whether you're a client, doing this work in your everyday life. It's so important, and it makes the world a better place. So thank you to everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm just so glad that we have science that is helping us with neurofeedback, is helping us to notice things that we might have already known, right? So it is nice to have this science, but we never want to lean 100% into that science because we all know that over science's history, it disproves itself all the time. So we love to put the heart in there, and we love to put our good sense in there. That's what we're talking about, the heart-mind connection, right? Thank you, everyone, for showing up here today, for listening. Thank you, Sam Tullman, for being here and for co-authoring the Academy of Eternity. If you would like a copy, visit us at theacademyofeternity.com and thealphasequence.com. I'm Erica Flint, and thank you, Sam Tullman, for being here. This is Living Hypnotically. Bye for now. Get the book. Start hypnotizing. Get the book and first hypnosis lesson free now at canyoubeahypnotist.com.